Welcome back to Mean Streets, a podcast where we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir and more. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And we are your cinematic sleuths, and it's time to crack another case. Matt, what have we got lined up for everyone this week?
This week's case is 1945's The Woman in Green, starring Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, and Hilary Brooke. Written by Bertram Milhauser, taken, of course, from the stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, and directed by Roy William Neill. The logline is: Sherlock Holmes investigates when young women around London turn up murdered, each with a finger severed. Scotland Yard suspects a madman, but Holmes believes the killings to be part of a diabolical plot.
I mean, that is kind of what happens in this movie. That is kind of what happens in this movie. But
that's the movie in a nutshell.
to tackle a Sherlock Holmes movie, the maybe the only one of Basil Rathbone that is sort of maybe kind of ish noir. Bit of a stretch here, but it's fine. It's fine. But we thought we wouldn't go this one alone. So we brought on Mark Jones and Paul Chapman from the Doings of Doyle podcast to help us look at the small noir elements of this 1940s Sherlock Holmes movie. Welcome, Mark and Paul.
Well, thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
It's our pleasure.
Welcome. I feel I should justify this choice because this is one of my choices. This is one of my choices. And I think film noir is an extension of more generally crime fiction, crime cinema. And if you're going to talk about crime fiction or crime cinema, you can't really miss out the granddaddy of them all if we leave out Poe. And I thought, we should just address Sherlock Holmes, perhaps in general, but with specific reference to a film of the noir period. And this is the one that we chose. So I'm just going to justify it with those few words from me.
It's fair enough. I mean, people gave us grief when we did Lethal Weapon, so I don't know what kind of grief we're going to get for The Woman in Green. Subscriber count just tanks after this one. You're not doing true noir.
Well, it'll be a test. It will be. It
will be a test.
What do you chaps think? How noir is this? How noir is Holmes? Let's pose that question.
You could, in a way, say that Holmes, the character himself, does have elements of the kind of the noir, hard-boiled in some of the original stories. He's very much, even though he's got Watson, he still has this very much working on his own element. A lot of the cases are darker than you would actually think. I mean, obviously we've got things like The Man with the Twisted Lip. You're going into an opium den. You've got the mean streets of 1880s, 1890s London, rather than the mean streets of 1930s, 40s America. But there are a lot of points of similarity, and the Holmes is somewhere down the line he is a model for people like Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade. It is different, but it isn't different.
I tend to agree with. I mean, I think he has more in common with those noir heroes than he has with Poirot or
definitely
in the Golden Age.
Definitely.
And I do think that you substitute the bottle of whiskey for a violin, you substitute the shabby office for the Baker Street rooms, which are equally shabby, and I don't think you strain too far from that sort of territory.
Yeah, and you don't have you got some other elements like I suppose the drug use is kind of like an early forerunner of the alcohol use that you maybe more associate with your noir detectives, and you've got people like I suppose Irene Adler is a bit of a kind of early femme fatale.
Yeah.
I
don't disagree with any of that. I actually wrote an essay about this that came out a few years ago, literally looking at the noir ingredients of Holmes in the novel, in the short stories and the novels. And I agree with what everyone's saying. There are definitely elements of that, and it's sort of a shame because once when the classic era of film noir is happening, I feel like Holmes on cinema has been so infected by British Golden Age, i.e. your Poirots and things like that, that it's the adaptation is like we're doing a Christie but with Sherlock Holmes, and we're not really doing Sherlock Holmes, even though, and I find that that's kind of part of the frustration for me with a lot of the old Holmes and some of the and some of the new stuff. But
That's certainly true of films like The House of Fear and Faces Death. Sherlock Holmes Faces Death, which are murder mysteries of the old Agatha Christie country house type, with Holmes shoehorned in. That's definitely true of those. I'd say it's true of the Scarlet Claw, but I sort of treat that as a universal remake of Count of the Baskervilles. And arguably more enjoyable. But there we go.
Well, yeah, I would say definitely more enjoyable than The Hound. But the other thing about those kind of Scarlet Claw and Pearl of Death, which come before this, is that they have more of the kind of callback to the Gothic elements, the Gothic roots of Sherlock Holmes as well. And one of the interesting things that I think is happening with this series, by the time we get to Woman in Green, is that you start with them being essentially World War II propaganda under Universal. By the time that you get to the Woman in Green, they've got quite dark, actually. And you sort of see that certainly in the couple of movies before this, but even at the beginning of this one, you've got quite a dark tone to it, dark subject matter, which does place this one, a bit closer to noir territory than perhaps some of the others.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe should we talk about just kind of briefly everyone's introduction to Holmes, just to sort of see where we all sort of found the character and his influence on each of us. Do you start with you, Mark, and go around?
Well, I was delighted when this was suggested because I think this film is my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes.
Interesting.
I'm fairly sure that the first movie I saw, certainly the first experience I had of Sherlock Holmes was watching a Basil Rathbone movie, and I'm fairly sure that it was this one, because no spoilers, but certainly the ending stuck in my mind. What happens at the end is what's stuck in my mind, and watching it again
not for the right reason.
Well, exactly. The thing is, you see, this is what happens when you're about 10. But no, so it's really peculiar going back to this movie, which I've probably seen, I don't know, umpteen times over the years. But this, to me, is the movie that kind of gives me the biggest callback to my early experience with Sherlock Holmes. But from there, I went straight into reading the books, and from reading the Sherlock Holmes stories into the rest of Conan Doyle, and that was really my introduction.
Paul?
Yeah, mine's slightly different. Really, I wasn't really. Holmes was sort of on my radar as a young boy, just in the background as those films that were on a Friday night on BBC Two. But it was really my mid to later teens that I was beginning to get really interested in the Victorian period, and then saw one of the Jeremy Bretts. And that was it for me. This is the production values, the fact that it looked as it was meant to look, and that just meshed together with my interest in Victorianism, Edwardianism, and from there straight to the canon. You read it cover to cover, everything, and I've never looked back, basically. And then that just extended, obviously, into an interest in Doyle himself as well. And there's my life shaped out.
And then from there, you concocted the doings of Doyle.
Yeah, eventually, that's where it was all leading.
Now with yours, your journey.
I think I've mentioned this before. My very similar to Mark. BBC Two, as Paul says, went through a phase of showing 1940s detective films, like Charlie Chan, Mr. Moto, things like that. And the Rathbone series was one of those that they showed. And I saw the Scarlet Claw. I remember it vividly. I saw the Scarlet Claw. And I remember saying to my dad, my dear old dad, that was the best one I've seen so far of these. And he said, oh, these are books as well. And for Christmas that year, I got the complete Sherlock Holmes stories. Like Paul, read it cover to cover. And at the time, the second series of the Brett show was being aired. So I caught the tail end of that. I was a bit too young for the first series of Brett, but I caught the second. And like Paul, never looked back. And it's I've said before on this show, Holmes is where it all started for me. The whole interest in crime fiction. From Holmes came things like my love of things like Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, all the Hammer stuff. But also from Holmes, I went to Poirot, went on and on and on into the Golden Age and beyond. So
Yeah.
Holmes is where it all started for me.
Holmes is where the heart is.
Mm.
Similar actually. I guess we also had my entry point really into detective fiction was Holmes. I remember Rathbone films being on as a kid, being on like TMC and stuff like that. I don't have vivid memories of watching them, but I remember their presence being around. And it wasn't until I was about 12 that it really hit me when the Fox Kids cartoon came on, Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century. It's just an absurd cartoon that made me want to go get the books. And I remember renting some from the library, and that really began my interest in Holmes. That sort of went on and off. Despite being interested in him at that point, it sort of like poked its head out and then went dormant again until my 20s. So I had about this 10-year gap or so where I was more focused on music, and I was a musician, so I did a lot of music stuff in my teens. And then when I went to university, I rediscovered Holmes, and then from there, more golden age stuff, then onto the hard-boiled stuff, and then here we are. But so it was that's Holmes was kind of the gateway for me into a lot of stuff. And what's so fascinating about Holmes, as we said, the character, the literary Holmes absolutely has shades of noir to him, but he also has, as you mentioned, Mark, earlier, this elements of gothicness to the novels, to the character. And there's definitely a gothic element to hard-boiled fiction. They sort of have a lot of gothic fiction has that sort of family with secrets that they don't want exposed, and that happens a lot in Holmes's fiction as well, which then lent itself so nicely to the Hammer horror. And Holmes is this interesting kind of character who could go into a hard-boiled world, but can also go into this horror world, and that's why you have fun mashups like Holmes versus Jekyll and Hyde, and things like that. So he's this weird sort of like center point that sort of connects to different subgenres. I think just within crime fiction, I find that quite fascinating. I don't know if you guys go on.
I mean, I think he's the only one that can apply to as well. For whatever reason. I mean,
you don't see a paranormal Poirot.
I don't want to see Poirot fighting Dracula, no. But but the various attempts to have Dracula. Yeah, Miss Marple versus Frankenstein.
That's fine, yeah.
But
versus the Wolf.
The various attempts of Holmes versus Dracula that have been done are actually, by and large, pretty good. And Holmes and Jekyll and Hyde, I think, is very good. I turn away from
that was a good book.
Yeah, I turn away from Holmes meeting Tarzan and things like, and Holmes fighting the Martians from the War of the Worlds. I can draw a line in the sand before I get to there. But yeah, Luke's right. I think that Holmes he can drift into the gothic horror, and he can drift into noir, and he is, even in some of the stories, quite at home in what would later become Golden Age type stories. The Reigate Squires, for example, is a very Golden Agey type story, as is something like the Abbey Grange, perhaps, or some of those stories where it is a country house murder mystery. There's a lot of those in the Holmes.
I was trying to think of kind of noiry early Holmes stories. I thought maybe Red Circle, which might have elements of it as well. Yeah. And then, of course, Conan Doyle was writing into the 1920s with this stuff. Finishes Holmes in 27, so he's kind of at the early stage of the writing of some of the more hard-boiled stuff. And some of that, the late stuff, gets really quite grim. The retired colorman at the end is pretty horrible tale of murder and adultery. And it's interesting to think about, Conan Doyle trying to write in that era. In the 20s, he's still experimenting with his writing style. He's experimenting with different, he was constantly innovating. I mean, there is a particularly terrible short story he writes, which is clearly a Dashiell Hammett inspired story called The Last Resource, which is terrible. but you can see him experimenting with kind of hard-boiled Ever so
And-
I think I've
briefly.
read that story. You know, I read that.
And you got the Nightmare Room as well, which we've covered, which is Doyle talking about Hollywood and mixing in these kind of fake worlds and what's real and what's fake, and playing about with these ideas. So he is, as Mark said, he's trying to come up to date, and sometimes he succeeds, and sometimes he most definitely
presumably
doesn't.
this is
But
towards
that's-
the end of his
yeah.
career in his life.
Yeah.
And
So he's still
I
trying
mean,
to do new stuff when really he could easily rest on his laurels, and not bother. So,
and you say with the late Holmes stories, I think it was Shoscombe Old Place again, where you've got another one where, as you say, Matthew, this has got golden age elements mixing in, but you've got a deeply gothic element, and it's quite unpleasant to suit perhaps more modern tastes.
Yeah, and one of the late stories, Thor Bridge, I think is very much a golden age.
Oh yeah, good point.
That's very much a golden age, isn't it? With a twist, which might be quite obvious these days, but at the time, I suspect wasn't. And
So you're groundbreaking.
the trick ending is a classic golden age trope. So the Sherlock Holmes stories, I think the overall point is that the Sherlock Holmes stories span a lot of different offshoots of what we would generally call crime fiction. I think it veers into all sorts of territories, including 1940s Hollywood.
Yeah. Yes. Well, on that note, I guess we should finally talk about the woman in
Let's
green.
talk about this. Let's talk about this beauty. I think
we
there's
can
an
go
overarching
behind the
theme to
camera and
Rathbone.
chat a little bit about the making, the people who made this happen. Bring them to trial.
I think we can guess what Luke's view of this film is already.
Yes. Matt texted me yesterday and he's like, I'm watching the film and I got a smile on my face. I texted him hours later. I just finished the film. I didn't smile once. And this is not the first time I've seen this film. I have the box set, and I've seen this before, but I remember most of it, but it was sort of colored in my memory as being slightly different and better. But we can start by looking at Roy Neill, I suppose. So he directed most of the series. He came on with the fourth film onwards, and saw the film to its conclusion. I think as a director, he seems perfectly apt for this stuff. I mean, his CV spans romances and westerns and a number of crime and mystery films. Things like the circus queen murder from like the 30s, and the Lone Wolf Returns. The Lady Vanishes. He only has one proper film noir credit to his name, and that is The Black Angel from 1946, which is after I believe after all of the all of his home stuff is done, which is a Cornell Woolrich adaptation of the book of the same name. But I mean, I think as we said earlier, I think like the character of Holmes being kind of his fingers in different sort of genres like mystery and gothic and whatnot and horror. I think with Neil's pedigree of having his fingers in a lot of different genres as well, probably worked to his favor in this series. What's your guys' take on him as a director, not just with this film, but just his sort of overall filmography, but his Holmes batch?
He's pretty. I've always felt he's pretty workmanlike. But he has got moments of style, and there are moments of style even within this as well. There's a lovely moment at one point where Watson comes down the stairs and Moriarty goes back up, and it transitions at the end of the stairs. It fades to black and fades back up again. He has moments. He's a bit too fond of his Dutch angles. Every time someone is feeling a bit shaky or disorientated, the camera has to go on an angle. But you know what? I think he's a good storyteller, and that's the interesting thing. And if you think about some of his other works, he did a great adaptation of Dr. Sin with George Arliss in the 30s, and that's a great movie. And actually, I did watch a few weeks ago Black Angel from 46, which was his last movie because he died very shortly afterwards. And I actually thought that was pretty well done. Particularly given that the star of it was Dan Derea, who's not one of the greatest actors of the 1940s, but actually, it's got Peter Lorre in it as well, and June Vincent. It's actually a pretty good movie. I quite enjoyed that one. But he has moments of style, and he is quite good at actually getting the setting up visually some of the information that you're going to need for later. I was struck when we were watching The Woman in Green that when he introduces Crandon, who is the Lydia's the Woman in Greed's sort of maid. That the introduction there is she's right at the balcony looking down to the street below, and he didn't have to do that shot, but for obvious reasons that's been set up.
And there's a brilliant touch which I only noticed on this viewing, which is that she stubs a cigarette out on the same brick. Will cause Rathbone to stumble.
Indeed, yeah,
brilliant bit of foreshadowing. Brilliant,
isn't
bit
it?
of foreshadowing that.
Yeah,
perhaps too clever. Good because everyone's forgotten it by the end. but and for like 30 odd years of watching this film, never seen it until yesterday. So it's perhaps a bit too good, but it's nevertheless it's there, and that shows a certain flair, and all that sequence I think is well done. The shadows in that apartment room I think are all well done, and there's a sort of Val Lewton taste or flavor to the scenes where you see the girl walking home who becomes the next victim.
Oh yeah,
reminded me very much of the Val Lewton in Cat People, especially. And I think that that's all shadows and flickers of light and street lamps that we've talked about as being noirish elements. So I agree. I think he is a bit workmanlike. These films are all a bit sort of, they do the job that they've got to do and then they disappear again. But they were B films, and as B films, I think there are certain qualities about them and certain shots and decisions that are made, artistic decisions that are made, that elevate them on occasion. It's just that they can't sustain it over an hour and a bit in each one, over 14 films or 12 films.
Yeah, and doing 3 a year or whatever they were doing at this point, 3 or 4 a year. Yeah.
But when they do them, they are very good.
You almost feel in this. I mean, I was very struck. The use of shadow and light is great. It's kind of almost the expressionist level at points in this. It is really well done. And you wonder, from what you were saying, Matthew, that if almost they're trying to educate a B movie audience into this is what you want to move on to A movies, and you'll see this even better when you go and see them. But you do get it, as you say, the first with the kind of tracking of the girl near the start. It's very good, very good tension and beautifully shot. But you've also got the problem with these films is you've got the other element comes in. So when the sniper is going up, and you've got Watson bumbling around the empty house, so you've got some rather lovely shadow and light, and then you've got this idiot. Wandering around in it, just wrecking the shot, and bringing the whole tone down.
I have so much to say about Watson in this film.
Mean Streets will return right after this. Who doesn't love a good boxing movie? Well, Steve Hunt presents the Boxing Movie Podcast. On each episode, Steve and his guests discuss a movie that has boxing as a theme. Do not be put off if you're not a fan of boxing, though. Of course, he covers the likes of Rocky and the sequels, but the depth of boxing-themed movies across cinema history is much greater than you might imagine. Boxing Movie Podcast has covered the early works of Hitchcock, explored the world of blaxploitation cinema and the golden age of film noir, with episodes covering The Setup, Champion, and Stanley Kubrick's Killer's Kiss. You might not have previously considered yourself a boxing movie fan, but after listening to a few episodes of the Boxing Movie Podcast, you may have to reconsider that view. Find the Boxing Movie Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you love Mean Streets, join us on Patreon and get exclusive perks, insider access, and a chance to shape the show.
Depending on the tier of your choice, get early episode access, your name in the credits, and have your questions read on air.
You can help us choose films for us to review, unlock exclusive commentaries and reviews, and join our members-only YouTube Live Q&As.
So slip on your trench coats, pull your fedoras down, and join us on Patreon today.
Now, back to the show.
We'll get there.
You know,
We'll get there.
We'll get there. But you're right, Paul. You're right. In the midst of all this great stuff that's happening, and quite serious stuff, you've got this buffoon,
Yes.
who shouted about fat people having canaries.
We'll get to Watson.
We'll get into
Watson. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great detailed memory of the Rathbone films, but I did find there were a number of shots in this that I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is fun. I think the little pool that Mrs. Marlowe has, her hypnotic pool, that sort of reminds me of Galadriel's mirror in The Lord of the Rings. I thought that was the first time we see it was quite cool, and then the next time when we see it with Holmes is really quite impressive at times. Then it gets a little bit cheesy when we get like too much of their like solo faces popping up, but it was a very effective moment. I agree with the Dutch angles, but I did like the Dutch angle scene at the end when Holmes and Marlowe are talking at the club. She's trying to seduce. Well, she thinks she's seducing him, and we think he's being seduced. I thought that was a perfect moment for a sort of visual tweak to say things aren't right here, but we don't know what the wrongness is. Is it that he's being fooled, or is she actually? That to me worked quite well. And there is some terrific mood in certain places. We've mentioned the scene with the girl walking down the stairs, and that sort of very dark, Victorian scary alleyway. So I think there are some really cool flourishes to this, but ultimately, I mean, it is a B movie at the end of the day. But it's not without, I'm going to be quite harsh later on, but it's not without some merit on Neil's part. But I was feeling like these films sort of remind me of what would have been like almost like a 1940s equivalent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where they're, the first couple of Basil Rathbone films, if memory serves, I feel like I enjoyed them and they were decent, but then they're churning them out to the point where, Milhauser is recycling endings from other movies that he's written, so it's like, okay, we're running out of steam because we're churning so many out at this point. And I mean, Bertram Milhauser, we can talk about him for a minute, I suppose, because he wrote a number of these films. So he wrote Holmes in Washington, Face of Death, Spider-Woman, Pearl of Death, and co-wrote The Scarlet Claw. But interestingly, he's also not a stranger to film noir. He has a handful of film noir credits to his name, a couple starring Bogart. So he wrote The Big Short and Tokyo Joe, The Suspect, and The Web. And was also interesting. He was a story editor for The Lone Ranger, the TV show. Which is really that I find that quite cool. So he's he also has a good kind of list of credits to his name. That's like, okay, you kind of know what you're doing, but I got the vibe that with this it was a rush job. This script needs to be written, and I just can't think about it because they needed it yesterday.
I think that's true, and I think it's fair to say, and it's an important point to be made, that this is very much in the sort of tail end of the Rathbone series, so it's past its best by the time we get to this. Before that, it's had a very steady increase in quality until it reaches what I think is its really top-notch period, which is sort of Spider-Woman through to the Pearl of Death, which are three really good Holmes films. It sinks a bit with The House of Fear. It sinks a bit further with this. And then you get to Pursuit to Algiers, which is just unwatchable. virtually
Yeah.
unwatchable.
Completely.
And then, I mean, that's only on for an hour. Well, is it? It's only on for an hour, and there's 2 songs to pad it out. So, you know, and Watson sings one of them. So I think this is, and certainly Rathbone was feeling it. There is a sense of burnout by the time we get to this, and you know, it is true that he recycled the ending. I mean, if he was going to recycle an ending, I wish he picked a better one than this. But
he does recycle a couple of bits in this, doesn't he? I think that the Sir George holding the matchbox is from something else as well, isn't it? It's another.
Yes, I can't remember what it was, but that yes, I read that.
I think it is.
Although
that bit is good. That bit,
it's a good
deduction. That whole deduction,
the
whole reconstruction is like the one he does in the attic in the Sign of Four. It's I really enjoy that bit, but there is a duplicated plot device, should we say?
Yeah.
I was when I was looking through the credits for Bertram Milhauser, because I wasn't really familiar with him outside of this. The one that caught my eye was that he wrote a movie called The Life of Jimmy Dolan about a boxer.
Yes.
But the best thing about it was that he also wrote a fake biography of this boxer, which came out, and it had the title Hot Leather. And I can tell you now, I wish I hadn't Googled that.
Yeah. You should always do that on somebody else's computer.
My Google has a private search function.
Yeah, I need to switch to find that, don't I?
Oh man,
Milhauser had Holmes' form because he wrote the script for the 1932 Clive Brook film.
He did,
which ostensibly was based on the William Gillette play. But it seems to me that almost every film that could possibly get away with saying it was based on the William Gillette play said it was based on the William Gillette play. Almost none of them are based on the William Gillette play. It just seems to be a way of selling tickets. And I would argue that having seen the 1932 Sherlock Holmes with Clive Brook, everything he did for Universal with Rathbone was better than that, no matter how bad it was, because that film is really stilted and not aged well at all. But he had fun, and he did a few. You know, Nick Carter, Master Detective, he did in 1939. So he knew his way around crime films and a crime story.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's what we're saying. It's the burnout. You can feel the burnout. You can feel it. This is Captain Marvel of the Holmes, the Basil Rathbone Holmes movie. This is Ant-Man. You know, this is what.
No. That's the shoot to Algiers, Luke. I'm telling you.
Oh yeah.
I think that the key is don't stop and think for a moment.
Exactly.
At any point with these sort of scripts, don't try and add it up. Don't try and make sense of it. Just go with it.
Yes. Yeah. It's said that this, you know, they're like, oh, this story was a sort of inspired from The Final Problem and The Cardboard Box, and I'm like, is it? I mean, you nick some dialogue, and there's a severed body part in a box.
And
is that enough? Is that enough?
No.
I don't think.
Well, this is what Universal did. They said based on, I think is it the secret weapon that's based on the dancing men, but all it does is have a dancing men code of its own.
Yes,
you know,
that's right.
None of the story elements, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they did. They took inspiration for it should say inspired by rather than based on.
You've got what really struck me with this is the confrontation scene between Holmes and Moriarty. It starts with Doyle dialogue, and so far so good, and then it veers off, and that really shows you how good a writer Doyle is, because this is what happens when you try to change it and you're nowhere near as good, and it just becomes very. It's almost embarrassing to listen to something.
Yeah, you're right. There's a far cry from all that I have to say has already crossed your mind to we can walk through the gates of eternity hand in hand.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The dialogue.
Not even I overwrite that much in that sense.
I have to admit, the dialogue in this was one of the contributing factors to my displeasure. It was just too many stupid lines. Whether it's that or there's a scene where Gregson and Holmes are in the morgue and they're looking at one of the bodies, and Gregson's like, "Oh, her finger was hacked off," and he's like, "Oh no, it was perfectly cut and like was surgical." I'm like, so it's like, okay, the Scotland Yard, they have no idea what's going on because they're fucking idiots. Because they think this surgically cut off finger was hacked off. Like, if they can't tell that difference, of course they're not going to find the murderer.
Well, you've also got the bit that struck me earlier with when Holmes is brought in, and they're talking, oh, it must be a homicidal maniac. And Holmes goes, no, it's far more sinister than that. And I think, well, what's more sinister than homicidal maniac?
There are some pillars, but the one that really got me was the bit where Moriarty goes to see Lydia and says, Holmes will be at the Mesmer Club, and she says, the Mesmer Club, the meeting place of the top hypnotists in London. Like, yes, I just said that. It's like,
turns to the screen.
That's the cinematic equivalent of the old radio cliche of, don't move, I've got this gun and it's pointed right at you.
Yeah, indeed.
There are some clangers in this, and the desperation, the sort of desperation to hark back to the Ripper murders. Because Jack the Ripper is mentioned about 5 times in 2 minutes.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about that, because what was interesting is because we're trying to how do we fit this into film noir? It's interesting that this film opens up with a voiceover, what you would expect from a classic film noir. It's sort of that Bogart sort of things are difficult, and it almost gives you the impression, that you're going to be following Gregson and his thought process throughout this film. And I was sort of interested in that concept that then very quickly goes away. And you're like, wait a minute, why did you even have Gregson open this film up with a voiceover, lead the audience to believe we're going to be following things maybe more through his eye, with Holmes and Watson sort of coming and going? Because it's like the first 15 minutes or so feels like it's all just Gregson doing stuff. It feels like a huge portion of the opening is more Gregson, and then he's like, finally I had to go get home. And it's like, okay, right, interesting. But I enjoyed that sort of tease of like, oh, here's Gregson's point of view. We're gonna follow this, and then the film just dumps it. I'm like, that's
cool. The actual voiceover should be Watson, but he's too much of an idiot to pull it off, isn't he?
Well, all Lestrade. I mean, that's the other thing, is that obviously they've decided that they can't possibly use Lestrade for this because it's just the material is too dark, and I think I think it is noticeable that even in Watson's first scene, he's not a bumbling idiot. We're going to get plenty of that later, but at the beginning, it feels like they're actually key. They are actually trying to dial into something quite dark in the first few scenes.
And in that, Watson's first appearance is delayed for quite some considerable time, as Luke says. It's a good 15 minutes of Holmes and Gregson. It's almost as if they reluctantly bring him in because what the story they're telling doesn't fit him at all. But he does have a good moment in that opening scene when, I can't remember the exact words, but he's reading a postcard, is it, or a letter from the sister, who says, "Looking forward to seeing you on the summer holiday or summer vacation," whatever it is they say. That adds a personal touch, and Watson is quite moved by that, but very quickly descends into total inanity.
The whole film moves away from that, doesn't it? The whole tone. And when we talk about Jack the Ripper, we start with this really dark tone, or let's set up this series of murders, but then the whole thing begins to descend. The knockabout starts to come in, and the depersonalization of all the other victims, and then you've got the way it's actually done with the the cutting off the fingers, and you think that could be but it then, to me, it's just wrecked when you've got the finger murderer and the finger murders, and it just, I'm sorry, it's just it has not got the whole thing of Jack the Ripper I mean, the
No,
whole. I
no.
was watching it with my partner Therese, and she's maybe they should have called it Jack the Snipper, but because of the level the film's at.
Is this a good time to talk about the fact that it was going to be even darker
Yeah.
than this?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, go on.
Because the age of the girls
Mm.
in the original scripts was nearer sort of 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And they were going to and the weird doctor who's got his nurse and his dollies
Oh God.
who is a character he's weird, he's creepy, and he's clearly something unpleasant. But I would have liked more of him because he's the most interesting thing we've seen in about 40 minutes by the time he arrives.
Oh yes.
And he's obviously a leftover from that original concept of what dare I say, a child killer, and almost a child sex killer.
Yeah.
Now that's quite dark in anybody's book, especially for 1945, and especially for a Sherlock Holmes vehicle.
Yes.
And I think that obviously they got cold feet.
Well, no, the Hayes
I think
Code were
that
like,
left
you
us with
cannot
this.
do this. They were like, no, you cannot do this.
Cold feet was perhaps an understatement, but that would have been an interesting way, an interesting thing to examine, an interesting thing to tackle.
Yeah, and they could have elided over it, couldn't they? I mean, they don't have to be quite. Well, I don't know. Maybe they did have to be quite so specific, but in these kind of movies, we don't see the finger cut off. We have that great moment where Sir George picks something out of his pocket, looks down, and goes. And from the expression, he's got a finger in his pocket. But I do think it's worth saying that when the code they turned around and said, look, you can't do that. That was about 3 weeks before pre-production. So as much as we're giving dear old Milhauser a bit of a hard time, he probably only had a couple of weeks to go off and redraft, quite heavily rewrite. I mean, I know this is kind of on that kind of production schedule, which is closer, more akin to television really nowadays. But all the same, you're having to do quite a heavy rewrite. So, and you're right, Dr. Simnel is the hangover from it, and he is one of the more interesting characters. You kind of feel like there's a more interesting story fighting to get out of this.
Definitely.
And I for my part, I feel like kind of Moriarty gets in the way of it.
That was the point I was going to make later on. I think using Moriarty ruins this. It should be Lydia on her own. That is the villain behind this for different motives that I can't begin to think about now. But Moriarty is a real sort of like muddies the waters, and it becomes just a cheap Moriarty again, And to me, Moriarty's always best when he's in the background anyway. I don't think he's particularly convincing when he comes out into the daylight, as it were. But I do think he spoils it, and because it just becomes a grubby blackmail plot. And I think Moriarty's above that, to be quite frank.
And it's a blackmail plot that doesn't make sense when you begin to try.
No,
Exactly.
it doesn't make sense.
Just about to say that, yeah. It's
because all Sir George has got to do is say, "Well, I wasn't at any of the other murders."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got an alibi
Oh,
for all.
that one thing, Moriarty. Dear me.
That was something that was really quite frustrating because it's you can feel and this is something that's like I don't really know if this is the result of rewrites or just because of fast writing, because even if you rewrite the age of the victims, you're sort of okay, well, you're dealing with this Jack the Ripper, light kind of plot, and then it's sort of tied to a woman who's hypnotizing men to make them cut these fingers off. Okay, fine, I guess. And then it's somehow connected to Moriarty having her do this so that he can murder Holmes. Like I cannot work out how in the world Moriarty went from I want you to hypnotize people to cutting and have them cut people's fingers off because this will allow me to get to Holmes and get him to be hypnotized and have him walk off the edge of a building. I'm like, what's the
makes no sense.
No.
Yeah. How are we getting from that to from A to B? I don't know.
If Lydia is a blackmailing hypnotist, which
makes
is
perfect sense.
That sounded better in my head. But if that's what she is, and she's just out for the money to support her lifestyle,
Yeah.
akin to Charles Augustus Milverton in the original stories, then that makes much more sense to me.
It's the underdeveloped
Moriarty
stuff,
sticking his
isn't it?
oar in doesn't do anything for me.
So the whole thing, you could have an excellent trio here with Lydia and the housekeeper and Dr. Simnel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make a far more effective trio. And you say Moriarty, just push him out of it, and it becomes a more interesting film.
Yeah,
and you can make a more logical plot from it. But I suppose I think Moriarty will sell the ticket, so it's Moriarty as well. People will come and watch it.
And the last couple of films they'd not done as well as they thought. The House of Fear certainly didn't do as well as they thought. And I think studio bosses, as studio bosses are wont to do, thought they had the answer, and that was to bring in Moriarty again. Who we'd not seen since, I don't know, film 3, since Washington.
Yeah.
That's right, I think. That's not the answer. That's a lazy answer. Again, that studios are wont to do. They give a lazy answer.
Yeah.
Because Lydia, I agree with Paul. I think that's a much more terrifying trio. Yeah. And Moriarty is just an add-on.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because Lydia really does fulfill the function of femme fatale. She is the dangerous woman, and her setup is quite nice. Where Holmes and Gregson are in the bar, and they make a note of, the Sir George is over there, and he's, is that his daughter? And don't be so naive, and you're like, okay, cool, that's we're dealing with a dangerous woman, a dangerous manipulator. She is, that's where this is going to, going to develop. And then because it, like we said, because they cram in Moriarty, that just gets totally sidelined. But, you could have had a really cool villainess in this, like someone that could almost be like iconic within cinema baddies if she'd been given the chance to actually be the baddie of the piece and not just a henchman in the end.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you can tell. So, for example, one of the scenes, we mentioned it before, the kind of cat and mouse scene where they're back in the Pembroke house and she is talking to Holmes. That scene doesn't have as much weight as it could have, because she's thinking, you can see in the way it's being played, she's thinking through, how am I going to, I've been told by Moriarty I've got to get this guy back to the flat and hypnotized, and she's trying to think of how best to do this. And actually, they play that scene really well. They play it really nicely. But actually, if she had the agency, and it was she wanted to actually bring him back because she was going to get rid of him by getting him off the ledge at the end of the day, all of that, let's leave aside the fact that why would you do it outside your own apartment, because that's a bit of a giveaway. But leaving that to one side for a moment, it has much more weight. And so and I agree with you, Paul. I think you get those three together. You've got creepy Dr. Simnel. You've got Crandon actually is quite a good character in her own way, and there are whole bits that then don't make sense in the way that it's played. So actually, when you get the first newspaper that arrives, Crandon reads the newspaper and she says, there's been another horrible finger murder, or as the newspaper vendor says, horrible finger murder. There's the first. She reads that and she says, I don't feel safe in my own home. What the hell's going on there? Because she's behind it. She knows what's going on.
Knows what's going on. Yeah. And it would be, if she was saying that with a sort of wry smile on her face, and Lydia's having a bath, isn't she? And she's saying, and she leans out and she says something like, "Oh, how terrible!" And she has got a smile on her face.
She has.
That takes on a lot more of a sinister undertone.
Yeah.
If you get rid of Moriarty, and I think this, without putting words in your mouth, Mark, I think this is the better story that's fighting to come out of this film. It's fighting to be told. And Moriarty just, totally screws it. Really.
And you've also got something that Luke picked on there with again the dialogue, which I just loved at the beginning with Gregson and Holmes, with the "don't be so naive," and then you get the add-on to, where could they be going? Don't be so naive. And it's lovely plain thing. That's the script at quality. I think if they could have maintained that and slimmed down this group of villains, there's
only Gregson was Watson.
Movie in there.
If only Gregson was Watson.
We can get into Nigel Bruce's Watson if you want, because yeah,
He's desperate to
Now
come
look,
out here.
at the outset, I'm going to say this: it was an old maxim of David Stewart Davis's that Bruce could only do the scripts he was given. So what he does with them, is what he's given to do with them, and he's the first Watson to be top billing alongside the actor playing Holmes. That's the support of Nigel Bruce. This film, he's at his worst, I think. But this film could have been even worse from Watson's perspective when we get to the hypnotism scene, because they changed that as well.
Thank goodness.
Do you know what it was?
Oh yes.
Instead of rolling
it wasn't going to be his
right. Sorry,
it wasn't going to be just his shoe and his sock.
They were coming off altogether. God, just makes you shudder. But
so for that, we're thankful for the Hays Code for stepping in.
So
And saying, no.
I'm not a big lover of censorship overall, but God for it here.
Yeah.
So Watson, I mean, he is at his most idiotic here. And unfortunately, in all these films, he has moments, but they're often balanced with moments where he is serious or he is empathetic. In this, he starts empathetic and fairly serious in one scene, and the rest of it is pure slapstick.
Well, actually, I had a look at. I timed it. I reckon he gets to about 30 minutes in to a 70-minute film when he's fine, and then at that point you get the scene where Moriarty tempts him away with this daft phone call.
Yes,
we need a doctor, but I'm retired. And then you've got the thing about the fat woman and the canary, and little Amelia grew up to be a horrible child. And the worst thing is that when he does the kind of bumbling stuff, he then gets kind of obnoxious and shirty with it as well.
Yeah.
And so from this point on, the second half of the movie, he's just kind of, it's not fun.
And the bit
I quite like the first half. I think the first half, and you're right about the reading the letter is actually really, really restrained. I was quite surprised at how restrained he was, because I don't remember. I mean, I've never really had that much of a problem with Bruce playing it up and playing it for laughs, because I kind of seen that you need something for this B-movie audience who are going to have a bit of light relief compared to the more serious Holmes. But here it really does go beyond what's acceptable.
Yeah, it's childish.
Yeah,
and you go from sorry.
Carry on.
Well, you say about that, Mark, with the serious tone with the letter, and then later on we get that Holmes reading out the description of Lydia, and Watson goes, have you got her number?
Have you got a phone number?
Oh, dear.
Yes. Yeah. It's just horrendous. All that is horrendous.
He's very skeevy. He's a very skeevy Watson in this.
He is, and it's because of scenes like that what I think is meant to be an expression of concern. When Sir George's daughter comes, and Watson is sat like right up here.
Oh my gosh, he's right up on her,
and he's
back
staring
off,
at her. You think, back away.
Yeah,
back away. This is as creepy as you were with Mary Morstan.
Yeah. Yes.
Just
it also just gets so frustrating. Like you have like that scene where he's going through the empty house, and he's meant to be being stealth, and what he's literally just screaming at things as he's walking up the stairs. I'm like, the sniper's going to know you're there. And even I was actually very confused by the sniper scene itself, because when he screams at the sniper and then Holmes stops him and the sniper doesn't move, I was like, wait a minute. Oh, and then they walk over and he's still there. I'm like,
it's really confusing, isn't it? That whole scene is really, really badly written, because you've got, Watson has seen the sniper take out Holmes. Then he's pulled back by Holmes, who's miraculously appeared. There's no explanation as to why Holmes had sent Watson across anyway. Although watching
the window's
it again,
open. The window's open. That's the excuse.
Yeah, that's right. It's just it's the so you've got this happening, but what then happens is Williams, his name is, isn't it? The sniper is just stood there stock still, and they, Holmes and Watson are having a conversation, and you're just thinking, why have you not jumped on this bloke? And and of course, because he's hypnotized, and then the wonderful bit of deduction from Holmes, which is waving his hand in front of William's face until such time as he goes, "I've got it." He's been hypnotized.
Yeah,
it's like, what on earth? Honestly.
Well, I thought the thing that crossed my mind with the sniper as well, because we have Corporal Williams, and I thought this explains, or could stand as symbolic of the film as opposed to the Doyle story. Is in the Doyle story, the sniper is a colonel. In this, he's a corporal. I think that's exactly that's the level we've descended with this film.
I'd never thought about that. That's one of those things I'll now never be able to unthink.
Although
this
oddly
film
enough,
doesn't deserve a colonel.
There is actually a nice bit of plot rationale in this, though, which is that they establish that Williams is a sniper by training, and that Lydia, or Moriarty instructed Lydia to go after this guy who has got the actual skill set to do the job, which it speaks to rather more sense of plotting that I would have thought would have gone into this movie.
Yes,
but
then why do you need the 4 other people? Why do you need the 4 murdered women? Then just go get this guy to shoot home.
Yeah. And then you get that dialogue after Watson's come back from being decoyed away, which is slightly earlier on. But there's then that barbing from Holmes, where he says, he was threatening a fat, lazy friend of mine called Watson. And Watson goes, "Watson? Never heard of him."
Yes.
Come on, Nigel, you're better than this.
Yes.
All that entire section is just balls in it. It's just horrendous.
But so is the hypnotizing moment of Watson. We sort of talked about it a little bit, but that whole moment it just made my skin crawl. I was so irritated because it's so obvious what's going to happen. It's so obvious that Watson is bumbling away. Oh, I could never happen to me. Okay, well, you're clearly going to hypnotize. It's going to be a big joke, and it's not going to be funny. And it wasn't. And
it's not funny. That's the biggest crime in this film.
It's just why waste the time?
Because it's padding, isn't it? Because otherwise the film's going to go too short. I mean, several of these films are filled with padding. You've got the scene where, is it the House of Fear, where the storm intrudes into the house and Watson is meant to be keeping guard, and he spends a good 5 or 6 minutes going around shutting windows and doors and picking up suits of armor and God knows what, because otherwise the film would be over by now, because we've worked out who everything is and it'd be finished, and it's 10 minutes short of its runtime. It's a common problem with these films, and this is this film's equivalent. Unfortunately, again, it's Watson who's getting the butt of the joke, as it were.
I think the other bit for me along those lines is what Luke was discussing earlier with the hypnotizing of Holmes, and it just goes on and on and on. And again, you just come on. It's just all tension is being lost.
All tension's being lost, and it's also duplicated. We've had this set up with Sir George. We know what the pool does. This is the whole point of that scene, to show how she does it without knowing that she's doing it. So we don't need to see it all again, do we? We've seen enough of it the first time around. So we just need to see Holmes looking into that pool. Cut away to somebody. Moriarty arriving, perhaps, and then cut back and Holmes is under. But again, that would take
exactly
3 or 4 precious minutes off the
exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Or we just don't need to see the pool, the start of the pool scene with Lydia at the beginning. They go into her flat, and the next thing we know, he wakes up in a different place.
That's good point. Yeah, but it should be one or
something
the other.
like that to smooth that over, so that when we get the actual pool scene, it has. It's scary. You feel that sense of horror, like, oh my god, he's actually being hypnotized.
Yeah, it would have been more interesting if they'd have actually hypnotized Holmes, and Holmes had been the Sir George part. That would have been more fun if they'd have done it the other way around. just because you have to knock Holmes off balance, and it's one of the problems I think with Basil Rathbone's Holmes is that he's never off balance. He's he's always right. Don't get any of the frailty of Holmes really, and
which you do get in the original stories. You do get Holmes is fallible,
exactly,
but Rathbone Holmes is total Superman. Nothing can phase him, nothing can beat him. He's always 10 steps ahead of everybody, and that's the issue with characters like James Bond, for example, where you say, well, we know he's going to win, so where's the jeopardy? It's the same with Rathbone's Holmes.
I don't know how typical this is, if this is just in this movie or if it is symptomatic of Rathbone's Holmes around this time. But I felt in this one Holmes was almost a bit like more of like a kind of conventional private eye, in that there aren't any real great leaps of deduction that help move the plot on. He just lands in his lap. Sir George's daughter turns up and says, "Hey, I looked out of my window and saw my father with an enormous shovel,
his lovely dressing gown,
burying a tiny finger." I mean, why does he need a shovel? But then you've got that, and then you've got, and then it's like the next bit that you have to move on is, well, the connection to the hypnotist, which is why you have Corporal Williams, and at the end of that he goes, oh, it must be hypnotism. He just moves between it as though he's being, that more kind of conventional PI way of bouncing from one thing to the
and
next.
with the Mesmer Club, it's we suddenly out of nowhere we get Mycroft mentioned.
Oh yes,
and then he goes again. Yeah, we don't see him. We just get his name thrown into the mix. Just simply go, oh, my brother told me about the Mesmer Club.
Yeah,
that's for that Leonardo DiCaprio gift where he's like, the meme, that's for the audience. Like, oh, Mycroft, image of Mycroft.
Yeah.
That's all that's for. That's it.
Yeah. And we could have had Sidney Greenstreet or Francis Sullivan or something. It would have been great casting. But we do, going back to the deduction point, we just have that one really good sequence in Sir George's office or his study, which suddenly you think, oh yeah, there was that bloke Conan Doyle, he wrote this, and this is the sort of stuff he wrote. I remember him.
Yeah,
I mean, he actually they do have there are a couple of moments where Holmes has throwaway comments which are kind of micro deductions. I quite like the one where he looks out the window when Sir George's daughter arrives and he says, well, the bag doesn't match the outfit, so there must be something in the bag, which is quite a nice deduction, except when you see the size of the bag next to it, it's really obvious that there must be something in the bag. And then it turns out that it's a finger. So it's like, why did you need a carpet bag to carry this thing?
Yeah.
But there was that. But the one I really liked was actually in the opening scene, the Pembroke House scene, where he observes Sir George with Lydia. And there's a great line which is something like, I think Gregson says, what are you looking at? And he says something like, a very handsome woman, not born to the purple, but doing a very good imitation.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of tiny little bit of observation and deduction that is just thrown in. That's going back to your point earlier, Paul, that's an element of, where you can feel that the script,
it's on track at that
stuff.
point.
Yeah.
There's also
I sort of got really frustrated by the fact that like every bit of investigation, it was things dropping into Holmes's lap.
Yeah.
And again, this is why it was so interesting having the opening of the film be from Gregson's perspective. So I was like, okay, is Holmes going to come in and him and Gregson are going to kind of work together? And no, but realistically, like Holmes doesn't do any proper investigating. He just sort of bumbles around, goes to some places. It's very obvious what he works out, that it's like this is not beyond Scotland Yard to be able to solve any of this. Like, come on. And so I found that quite disappointing. I mean, there is that sort of idea that the hard-boiled PI just sort of shakes trees to see what falls and goes from there. But Holmes isn't even doing that. He's just waiting for someone to bring him the information. He's almost, it's just like, well, this is hardly an exciting. I mean, the only thing I think he does is he proactively goes to one of the victims' houses to read that letter that Watson reads, and then gets whooshed away because there's another victim. And so again, it's him being whooshed away to do, there's just sort of, there's that lack of proactivity just irritates me throughout this.
Well, he's like the Big Lebowski. It's deduction from that school.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And it adds a real weight to the line where Holmes is berated by Watson for not coming and having his afternoon tea and his jam tart. And he mentions something about having brains. And Holmes says, "Brains? I haven't any." And you think, on the evidence of this film, no, you haven't. You really haven't. I don't know what you've done with them, but they're not in this film. Perhaps they were in Miss Fenwick's bag.
Yeah. Because the other thing I found interesting is this film has it really has two openings. And you have the interesting opening of Gregson with the VO and all that sort of stuff. And then you have the client opening. And that is Sir George's daughter coming to Holmes for help. And you're almost like this film is competing with two different ways of approaching the story. And one way is how it starts, but the other way is, okay, well, maybe Sir George's daughter comes to Holmes for help because her father's been acting strangely, and she shouldn't discover the finger. Holmes should have discovered the stupid fucking finger. But if that's how the story had been approached, then that makes him more proactive. He's off to this house to maybe chat with the father and see what's going on, or look around the house, and they find the dad dead, and he goes and looks around where he was digging last night, and that's where he finds the finger.
Exactly.
And then that's where you find, there's been some other murders or some fingerless people across London. Oh, was he the one involved? And then Holmes obviously would have to say no, he wasn't the guy, but you have the finger, but he's not the one. And then that makes it like a fixture movie.
Yeah. And also that opening would have been much more Doylean in my view, because there is an untold story about the Colonel Warburton's madness, and it's the idea of a man who sort of overnight goes mad, which to Miss Fenwick is what's happened to her dad.
Yeah,
that is a case that would fascinate Doyle's Holmes.
Yeah,
and he would be straight on that. You're quite right, and then it would be, well, hang on. He was burying a finger in his garden. That's what he was doing. That is then the link to the finger murders. Luke, you're absolutely right, Luke. That would have been a much more interesting and Doylean way of starting this story, and would have given Holmes some investigating to do.
Is it ever resolved who actually killed Sir George? I mean, I know it'll be a member of Moriarty's gang, but I don't think that's ever... Whoever it is has got enormous feet, because the footprints are astonishing. Like there's a close-up of Holmes, and he says something like, "Well, he came in through that window," and he pans to the window, and there's like an army.
Even Watson could have worked that one out.
Yeah.
I don't think that is ever resolved.
I don't think it is. I don't
think the other murders are resolved either, though. We don't know who committed the first 4 or 5.
I think that the hint is that it's the Doctor, isn't it? That he's following it, and he's actually doing it. But we don't, because he only appears at a point where he's playing with the doll, and we think, who on earth is this character? Nothing is explained properly.
And what the film needs you to do to understand that. I mean, I've only really worked that out from multiple watchings, because what the film needs you to remember is that, like, years ago, Holmes said at the beginning of the film, these fingers are surgically cut off.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you meet a doctor, but the fact of the matter is, too much has happened, and you've driven yourself insane trying to get through it. That you forget. You've forgotten about that point.
That's why they give him the line. They're not tools; they're instruments.
So then the idea is to frame Sir George so that Holmes gets involved further than what he's already involved?
Well, I think the plan is to blackmail the people that they plant the fingers on.
Yeah. I think Moriarty getting rid of Holmes is a bonus, isn't it?
Yeah, he's getting rid of Holmes because he's poking his nose in. I think the plan is only the blackmail plan, which is why it's much more of a Lydia plan than a Moriarty plan.
Yeah.
But this all comes with the way the whole thing's set up. Back to again what Luke was talking about with 2 introductions.
Mm.
So we open with this almost air of national emergency, which just kind of disappears as the film goes along. But even the opening as well has this comedy element because we're waiting for the commissioner, and then this funny little man storms in, who looks like he's the clerk of works, and so the whole thing is derailed with that as well.
And again,
it's
a very
bizarre
lame
film.
joke about the room being stuffy and the window being open. Just totally unnecessary. The clerk of works.
But if that was the only joke in the film, I would have been fine with it. It's
Well, it's the
Watson who
funniest
then
joke in the
ruins
film.
it with all of his other stupid jokes.
It's probably the funniest joke in it. The more I think about it, but
I do sort of wonder when Lydia gives two things. When Lydia gives Watson the weed, and he's like, "I don't approve of sedatives." I wonder if that was a code thing. Our hero can't be approving of drugs, because it felt like anyone who would have read the books would have been like, "What the hell are you talking about? You're very okay with sedatives." And then I also wonder on his side, because Lydia's last name is Marlowe, and she's a femme fatale, and I just keep thinking, is this meant to be a sort of nod to Chandler a little bit, because he would have had a few books out. Philip Marlowe would have had a few books out by this point, and would have been quite big. And it was just interesting to me to have Bertram, who's written some film noir, who's written for Bogart. Philip Marlowe is a big character at this time now, and then you have a femme fatale with the name Marlowe. It just, maybe I'm making connections where they're not there, but it's something I noticed. I thought, I wonder if this is meant to be like a little tiny, maybe not so subtle hint.
Yeah, it's an understandable connection to make. I think it's fairly logical. It's certainly more logical than a black and white film having a title like The Woman in Green.
Yeah, and even when you watch the colorized version, it's like she's in blue most of the time. But but
it's a bad time.
Actually, when I watched the Black Angel, the Neil movie from '46, the lead woman in that's called Marlowe as well.
Interesting.
So I don't know. So maybe he's just got it stuck in his head at this point, and it's something coming from Neil.
That could be.
Maybe.
That could be.
Maybe
he's got like a relative or something like that, and then it's just a pure coincidence. But fascinating. I guess then we get to the final scene where he's finally hypnotized, and then Moriarty comes in and he's like, "Oh, I've been waiting for this for so long," and it's like, just shoot him. Just shoot him.
Yeah.
We last week on the podcast we did a Fallen Angels episode. That's an adaptation of one of Chandler's short stories, and there's a scene at the end where the PI is confronting some gangsters, and he doesn't hesitate, and he just blows their head off. And it's like, because it's like that makes sense. You're in that situation, you're not going to wait around for some big denouncement. You're going to shoot the guy in the face so that you don't die, and so there is that moment with Moriarty and Holmes, I'm just like, just shoot him. You got the surgeon there with all the tools. Just slit his throat.
Yeah.
Well, he actually has the surgeon stick a knife into him just to test that he's hypnotized. That's a bad bit of dialogue as well, because when they're at the Mesmer Club, they set that up, don't they? And they say there's one infallible test to prove that somebody is not faking. Yeah. And then in that last scene, Moriarty says, "Well, there's one infallible test to bring in Dr. Simnel and his, that weird, creepy surgeon." And,
of course, there's no blood. Right. No blood from these.
There's no mark.
Piercings.
There's no mark. And there's a magic antidote that Holmes knew he would have. This is Rathbone being 10 steps away ahead of everyone else again. Yeah. No jeopardy.
I did wonder, actually, when they're in the Mesmer Club, there is a line from Watson where he says, "Oh, he's shamming it. The guy is probably drugged up to his eyeballs."
He does say that, yeah, he does.
And I thought, oh, okay, maybe that is actually just a bit of foreshadowing, that there are some drugs that would allow you to do that. And then I thought, that's probably giving this film a bit more credit than it deserves.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think they should have just shot Holmes or drowned him in the pool that she's got on a table.
Yeah. It's a very weak climax.
It's so weak, and it's so weak. The whole kind of go on, Paul.
It's to me. I'm afraid that this, I've just literally watched it, and it is just falling about laughing at the end.
Yeah.
I just couldn't stop myself. It's just
Yeah.
the fact that the leap for the drain pipe, and the fact that the drain pipe looks like it's made of rubber. It's just comic. It's pure pratfall.
Yes.
But also, what is Holmes doing? So at this point, he's pretending to be hypnotized. He's deliberately putting himself in danger on this ledge, and when Watson turns up. Watson says, "What are you doing there?" He says, "I was waiting for you, old boy." And it's just like, really? What was
Right.
what was your game plan here?
Yeah.
What were you actually planning to do? And then, of course, Watson gives a great line. Well, I was caught speeding.
I was done for speeding.
That's why I couldn't get here earlier. What a terrible ending! But then you get an exchange between Lydia and Holmes, which is quite nice. And you just think, oh, I want much more of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
But actually, and then you get. We haven't really talked about Moriarty, but I think Henry Daniell he's good in other things, but he's always Henry Daniell in other things. But I don't like him at all in this.
No.
I just
I
find
don't
him
like
like
him
a dead weight.
I don't like him as Moriarty. I think George Zuko's streets ahead of him in
Absolutely.
the 1939 Rathbone Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And if I have to have Moriarty in these films, then I wish it was George Zuko. Because he was much better. Danielle,
and he could also bring in humour.
Zuko
could be very, very understated humour in his character, whereas Danielle is utterly devoid of any level of humour.
I don't buy Henry Daniell as a mathematics professor any more than I buy myself as one. It's that's the whole point of Moriarty for me.
Yeah.
I think he's one of the worst. I think yet Rathbone thought he was the best.
Yeah. I think there is another big problem, which is that obviously what they're lifting from the stories here is the exchange with Holmes and Moriarty, and we've already had this in this. Well, it's not in this series of films, but in the Adventures, Zuko and Rathbone do that again in the cab. As at that point, Moriarty's. He's just been standing trial. He's just been acquitted, hasn't he? And they have this very, very playful conversation where they get into the cab, and you still have this kind of, you really should back off kind of. And they lift and paraphrase the Doyle dialogue in that scene. But as you say, Paul, Zuko can play it with much more humor. He plays all those sinister lines with a smile on his face. And that makes it even more menacing. But Daniela's can only do this kind of deadpan, just really sort of very dull performance.
It's also, I think, with the endings themselves of those two films, where, as I've just said, with the Danielle, it really is just it's Spike Milligan's Beware the Falling Man. It's just humorous. Whereas in the Tower of London scene, it works.
Yeah.
With Zuko, it's not. The humor element isn't there, but with the Danielle, it just does not work for 1 minute, unless you're going for laughs, and then it works very well.
At this point, I don't think they know what they're going for. They just need to end it.
Yes,
I think we can all agree they should have done sooner than this.
I can't help but feel that this film, because I remember when I first watched it, I think it was in between series 1 and 2 of BBC Sherlock, and then when BBC came out and that second series ended with him falling, standing on the ledge of a Bart's hospital and jumping off. My mind did go back to this film, and I thought, did they get the inspiration? Like, I mean, yes, he falls off the Reichenbach Falls. He's meant to have, but did they just? I think they just took the inspiration from this film.
Well, they might have done, because I mean, isn't it the last one of the first series has got like the Hoxton Creeper in, hasn't it? It's got like a character who's obviously the Hoxton Creeper, and he's the villain in Pearl of Death, which is one or two films before this.
One or two before this,
yeah.
I think they were nicking some stuff from this.
I think they were. I think they were.
We with part of our Patreon, we ask our patrons to submit questions. So we actually have a question from one of our patrons that we can jump to now, and it's from Steve Hunt from the Boxing Movie Podcast. he says he doesn't really have a specific question per se. He has this box set and he loves the Rathbone films, but he wishes that there were more and wants to know if we know why. Why did Basil Rathbone stop making these movies? Why did they come to an end? And I mean, I found some stuff, but what do you guys? What's your guys' take on this?
He'd had enough. He'd been doing it for 7 years by the time the series came to an end, but he'd also been doing it weekly on radio for as long, and he just burnt out, and he found he was doing the same thing over and over and over again in just different circumstances. So
the typecasting frustration came up quite a bit.
He was just playing this. He was playing the same character in the same situation, just slightly different window dressing. That's always been my understanding. Mark, Paul, have you any?
I think that's right, and sadly, it created a rift between him and Nigel Bruce, didn't it? Because Bruce wanted to carry on. He was really happy doing it. I mean, I think he was beloved because of this part, as much as we're decrying his performance here, or rather what he's asked to do here, rather than his performance.
He was very popular.
He was very popular, and but that caused a bit of a rift between them as well, didn't it? Because he wanted to carry on.
I think it's
enough.
This frustration as well. You get this with a lot of these sort of genre actors, people like Christopher Lee and so on as well. They actually want to go and do Shakespeare. They want to get back to the roots of real acting, as it were. And just you would, as Matthew said, you would burn out on this. So you can actually, I watched this in kind of high definition cleanup. And you can see how tired Rathbone is looking.
Yeah, he is.
With the close-ups where he's in the club scenes, he's just under the eyes, and you think this I can fully understand him. I want out. I know it pays, but
just to add something to that, it's easy for people to forget now because he is just Sherlock Holmes. How varied a career Rathbone had.
Oh gosh,
he took these. I mean, he'd won Oscars, or certain nominations. I think he won one for Romeo and Juliet, for a film in the 30s, and he was a Shakespearean actor. Who occasionally did sort of daring do films like Robin Hood and the
Colchester.
Absolutely brilliant.
But when he gets into Holmes, I'm afraid, as it did with Doyle, Holmes just sucks the life out of him. And he can't escape it. And his career was never the same again. But people forget how much of a respected actor he was and how varied his career had been. When you watch the last film, which is Dressed to Kill, or The Secret Code in England, you can almost see, because he knows it's his last one, he's got a bit more of a spring back in his step, and he seems to be enjoying himself a bit more because he's sort of doing that old, it's my last week in work, thank God. But yeah, the answer to the question is, I think he just got tired of it and couldn't wait for his contract to end. Holmes overload. There's the.
But he returned to Broadway. He didn't renew that contract. He's like, "Screw you! I'm going back to Broadway." And
he did.
Now, all these years later, he's remembered as Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
I guess it's a bit like Doyle. Doyle was so frustrated himself with only being known for Sherlock Holmes, and I feel like that is sort of the curse of the character. Some of the actors play it and then realize, shit, this is all that I'm going to be known for.
Brett was the same.
Yeah,
Brett was the same.
Doyle, at least in the end, could later on did understand that here's a cash cow for other projects that I want to do. If the public want this, I'll just I'll get involved to a certain level, use it to make money, and then I can carry on with the lifestyle, but also and obviously with the spiritualist crusade later on.
I want to go around America on a spiritualist tour, so I'll just write 2 Sherlock Holmes stories. And pay for it
True.
The house needs a new roof. I'll just write a Sherlock Holmes story then.
Is there anything else you want to mention about this film before we get to the rating of it?
There's one thing I've just got to mention because it amused me enormously was the fact that Holmes has this bust of Julius Caesar, which I couldn't help but notice had been adapted so that it actually had a nose more like Basil Rathbone.
Yes.
Just to
Yes.
be able to make that whole scene work. But actually, Paul and I had this conversation the other day. That's a slight improvement, isn't it, on the original? Or was it maybe with you, Matthew? That this is a slight improvement on the original story, in that in the original story, Holmes is bizarrely and kind of it's very difficult to fit into the chronology of the story. Had a wax bust made for himself.
Yeah. I mean, as
but
vanity
actually-
projects go, that's massive.
That's pretty good, isn't it? With this, but yeah, so he happens to have this one there. But yeah, I was very amused by the fact that he had a Rathbone nose.
With that
Yes.
great line, prominent men in history have prominent
Yes.
noses.
Prominent noses.
Oh, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else? Any other outliers? I think I've said
Exhausted
everything
it.
I need to say.
Exhausted the film.
Yeah.
Exhausted yourself.
I think we've squeezed the woman in green dry. I think.
I think so. So, for those who don't know, we rate all of our films out of 5 falcons, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. So, out of 5, we'll start with you, Mark. What would you rate A Woman in Green?
Oh dear me. Well, it has to be a 2. I don't think it's diabolically awful. I still enjoy it. I mean, partly it's the nostalgia thing, and I think going back to something you said earlier, Paul. If you don't think about it, if you don't think about it, and you just go with it, it's fine. The moment you start to think about it, it completely unravels. But I'd probably give it a 2, and my big wish is that, as I said at the beginning, there's a great movie here that's waiting to get out, and you just need to keep it darker, focus on Lydia, get rid of Moriarty, and you've probably got the makings of a pretty good movie here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Paul?
Yep, same rating from me for pretty much the same reasons. I'd go for the 2 because I did enjoy it. It gave me a good laugh as well. So it entertained me enormously. And it is one of the things. Years ago in a chat with Matthew, we were talking about the Richard Chamberlain version of King Solomon's Mines, and I lamented to Matthew that there's an hour and a half of my life I'll never get back. And Matthew turned to me and said, "But you'd watch it again, wouldn't you?" I said, "Yes, I would." And it's the same with this film.
I remember that
entertained me, and I would go back to it definitely.
Fair enough.
So yeah,
Matt?
2. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give it the same rating, but I'm going to give 1.5. I'm going to give half a star, half a falcon, to The Woman in Green. I'm going to give 1.5 falcons to the film where the villains are Lydia, the maid, and the doctor, and Moriarty isn't in it, because I think that's a better film than the one we get.
Much better.
So overall, it's a 2 from me.
Gotcha. And a falcon and a half of that is for a film that doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist with a far better opening, which is the one that you came up with. I mean, there you go. Between us, we've come up with a 1.5 falcon film and half a falcon for this.
Fair enough. Because I'm just always picky. I'm gonna be not as generous, and I think I'm gonna give it 1.5 because of all the things we've already said, but also because it took about 5 seconds to think of 30 different ways to make this
improve it
better.
Yeah.
all that would and everything that would have you could have done that the film could have achieved as well. It's not like these are ideas that would have been too costly or whatever. This is all within the what they could have done as well, which is like, okay, a 5-minute brainstorm would have solved your problem, guys. But yeah, so I'm a 1.5. But yeah, well, I think there we go. Thanks, Mark and Paul, for joining us for this sort of noir-esque discussion.
Thanks for inviting us on. It's been fun. Definitely, really.
It has been fun. It has been fun. Thank you very much.
It's our pleasure. It's our
Thanks
pleasure
for
to have
coming
you on.
on. Much appreciated.
I do think that The Woman in Green has been thoroughly investigated, and we can file this away, put her in the drawer, and lock the drawer, and then
Never
throw the case into the river and never look at it again. But Cool. We will be back next week, obviously, with another case. So, if you can, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you haven't left us a review, please do so. And remember to take care walking down those mean streets. So we just want to give a quick shout out to our paying patrons. We have Steve from the Boxing Movie Podcast.
We have Garm 1981.
And we have Gregory Sandoval. They are our initial ground floor patrons. So if you want to join Mean Streets and become a patron and get access to cool perks, make sure you head over to our Patreon page and subscribe today for as low as $1 a month.